Hey all, this week we're talking about communication through storytelling. So you've had a couple readings this week on some transmedia experiences like I Love Bees, as well as a reading I think you both have probably had in classes before on interaction design from Shedroff. So I'm probably going to breeze through a lot of the information interaction design stuff that relies on Shedroff and get more into this transmedia and kind of communication through storytelling and design stuff. So I had you guys read Shedroff this week, something you probably rereading again, and thinking about his thoughts on information interaction design. And I think a quote that still holds, a lot of value for us as we're thinking about storytelling through the digital medium. I think this quote has a lot of resonance. One of the most important skills for almost everyone to have the next decade and beyond will be those that allow us to create valuable, compelling, and empowering information and experiences for others. I think this is especially topical right now as Mark Zuckerberg is figuring out how to prioritize certain information so that users are having meaningful interactions using that digital platform, as well as how we decide we're going to design experiences for others in this digital realm. So let's briefly go back through information interaction design and talk about Shedroff a little bit and get into data and it driving storytelling. So a quick summation of a lot of the things that Shedroff gets into, and some of the different categories of design that are working within information interaction design. We have information design, which is kind of the organization and presentation of just different data, with the goal to kind of use that data to create meaningful information and knowledge, ways to use that data. Interaction design then is designing opportunities for users to interact with information, manipulate it, and communicate about that information. Give us resources to use our knowledge and communicate about it. And then finally, sensorial design is kind of the design of media that supports information and interaction, being media that engages sense memory, sense organization in some capacity, that's housed in sensorial design. So here is Shedroff's big spheres of moving data to information, knowledge, and finally wisdom. Just kind of laying it out here for you guys again, just to kind of review, thinking about how we research and gather information to present it and make a conversation or tell a story that generates wisdom and knowledge from kind of data that you've accumulated and kind of schematized in some sort of way that makes sense to users and people that are interested in interacting with the information that you're putting forth. So a big thing that we're going to focus on in this class in terms of storytelling is this idea that though we're trying to kind of come up with interactive narratives that are in some way driven by data and driven by digital technology, the quotient of data is relatively meaningless, right? It's the product of discovery, research, gathering, and creation, as Shedroff says. But also, data is fairly worthless to most of it. It's the product of research, but for it to have informational value for someone, it has to be kind of organized and transformed and presented in a sort of way that communicates a message. So here, just by way of quick example, data by itself is without meaning. Here are just some a rundown of different features of planets. Seeing how far apart they are, things like that, that we can take in as data, but we can't really necessarily tell a story with it until that information is transformed in some way. So here, that same information kind of organized into a table that gives the idea of a location order, showing that some planets are further away from each other than others. Neptune and Pluto are the furthest away, Mercury is the closest, etc., etc. It's in understanding this that we can kind of start to tell a story with information. And then finally, you can kind of see it here visualized in some sort of way. So using media to kind of make sense of, that all of that information in a relative way that is understandable to readers, so that, we can see, for instance, how far apart these planets are, as well as how far from the sun they are in sort of relative visual sort of information. So it's this idea of, moving data to information to something that is understandable and, hopefully something that engages users. So then perhaps maybe the final step in that process is, thinking about storytelling around that information that you've kind of synthesized. So here we see a classic book by Carl Sagan, The Pale Blue Dot, talking about Earth and kind of our relative position in the universe, so that you can see he would take that, same data over time, kind of provide different visual contexts and, come up with a story that engages that information and at the same time engages users, readers, whatever kind of personality or demographic you're looking to appeal to. So again, this is just different schematizations of data. Here we have, if the moon were only 1 pixel. This is from Josh Worth. This is, again, another visualization of information showing kind of relative scale and things like that associated to whether the moon were just to be associated with 1 pixel, what would that look like? Again, another way of visualizing information and, giving us, a deeper understanding of what's going on. So another quick way of looking at the model, we're taking what looks like disparate data, off there to the top left, and kind of synthesizing some of that into information that forms knowledge, and finally wisdom as, a kind of fully featured lattice. This is from Michael Creel, who's, another information interaction designer and writer on this model. So this is just another way of thinking about Shedroff's model that we've seen a few times before. So in moving from this concept of information interaction design to transmedia, we can think about this process as necessary since we're dealing with participants, human subjects who have, their own behaviors and attitudes. This is a really useful process for kind of understanding how your users might interact with features or storylines or any sort of thing associated with a project that you're making. So, kind of moving from data, you thinking about data about your users and how you might present that, in the form of a story, and then finally evaluate and interpret, that story, and understand how your users are working within it and participating. I have this thing off to the left that says when building transmedia, you have to figure out how much of this you're going to make for the audience to consume and how much you want to facilitate so the audience will do so, will do these steps on their own. So, you want to think about where you can build in, places of participation for your users, as you're thinking about how you're delivering information to them. So step one in moving toward, storytelling around data is, understanding the data, thinking about how it might make an impact on different categories of knowledge, different, social norms, different things like that. Understand what the data says, right? What do you want people to remember? Then you organize that stuff into information. So you create some sort of structure that gives people, the ability to find the data and information that they need, and, kind of allows users to interact with your information. What are you trying to communicate? You need to determine how much clarity you need in, writing, understanding, something we're going to talk about next week, narrative architectures and structure for things like that. How much clarity comes with, the type of story that you're writing and the data that you're presenting. So you have to know how you're organizing things into information. In thinking about how users can interact with a story, that's based on data and information, you always want to be thinking about how to apply the appropriate interactions, right? So if you want to have a story that causes users to consider their actions, you would make a highly interactive and adaptive story, one that's kind of governed by what users do, and if you want to make a digital story that communicates a specific emotional outcome, you'd probably make a less interactive story, one that, guides users on, more of a single fixed path. So you always want to be thinking about the appropriate interactions to apply to your project based on, the aims of that project. And finally, step 4, apply the most appropriate sensorial media. So you want to be thinking about, what media is best to motivate your characters in the eyes of your users, um, in whatever story you happen to be telling. What's best for conveying an emotional tone. How can you get a message across? We have access to a wide range of sensorial media in everything that we do and create and design. So thinking about what type of media you need to be employing when doing digital storytelling. So this week I gave you guys a reading by Jane McGonigal, which you may have seen before, may not have, on an alternate reality game called I Love Bees that was associated with Halo a number of years ago. And I want you guys to start thinking about transmedia environments and these alternate reality games and other related things, and how we can tap into that as a form of storytelling, how we can make our stories interactive, in a number of ways on digital platforms or, with real world events and things like that. So check out I Love Bees. There's a video in this week's Blackboard. Also look to there's several examples of transmedia and alternate reality games. If you guys want, I can post a few examples, and you guys can seek out your own. But be thinking about how these games, give information to their users, hold information back, things like that. Be thinking and be mindful of how these things are constructed. So if we were to go back to our model from Michael Creel, if we were thinking of I Love Bees, we have information that's mostly created and scattered around the web by authors. We have an audience that's using forums to look for relationships among the data. That forms knowledge and wisdom, which kind of ultimately unlocks portions of the game that would not have been beforehand. And so finally, taking the Creel model one last time and thinking about it toward this class, when we're thinking about data, we want to first kind of understand what we're communicating. What's the goal? How are we going to approach our audience? When we think about information, how are we going to organize and present that to the audience? What will they get? What will they not get? And for parts that audiences themselves will organize and present, how and where, on a forum with puzzles, they call each other, text each other, how is that going to work? And then moving to knowledge and wisdom, will audiences be able to discuss their own stories? If so, how and where? And thinking about how audiences and users are able to communicate with each other and the creators of a work, so that we better understand how to interact, with audiences as we create work. All right, guys, so this week we've read a lot about interaction design, information design, sensorial design, and we've looked into some transmedia narratives. You guys should look into other transmedia narratives and write up some documentation on those things so you guys can start to get a sense of some of these transmedia things. We'll talk more about those in the upcoming weeks, but that's going to be the to-do in terms of readings and things like that, and I'm going to detail your response paper on the next slide.